Hello everyone, this is Nathan Law, a democratic activist from Hong Kong, now exiled in London. First of all, I would like to express my solidarity for all of you who have been fighting for a free and fair society and a democratic system. This is very important for all of us to keep our momentum and keep our hopes alive. 45 years ago, thousands of students were put under siege, with dictators brutally opening fire with rifles and grenades on the campus. When unarmed students attempted to run or surrender, they were shot, beaten, raped, and murdered. Hundreds of students were injured and murdered, and over 3,000 innocent students and civilians were imprisoned. Decades later, no one has been held accountable for the atrocities. The tragedy of massacres brings back for Hong Kongers the painful memories of the 2019 movement's crackdown and the Tiananmen Square massacre 30 years ago. In the eyes of tyrants, students and teenagers are viewed as a threat. While we are told that teenagers are the futures of the country, those in power suppress and kill us without mercy. The commemoration of massacre in the 21st century is a reminder to all of us. Justice has not been served yet, and our fight goes on. We must bring those responsible for the tragedy accountable. Throughout history, dictators have established a repressive system to suppress all types of dissent, whether by shutting down communications, imprisoning dissident voice, or even killing or imprison them. But in the globalized world, authoritarian governments have become more aware of the power of any collaboration among civil societies. They have increased their repressive weapon to break off people's ties with the outside world, and they employ any methods at their disposal to do so. One way is through deportation and visa denials. I'll never forget my friend Joshua Wong, who was imprisoned in Hong Kong and deported by the Thai government in 2016. That was the time that the umbrella movement had come to an end for 2 years. As one of the prominent organizers during the movement, Joshua was invited to speak at an October 6th event, which remarked the 40th anniversary of the massacre of student protesters. The talk was meant to be about his life, his education, the political thoughts, and political changes in Hong Kong when it was restored to China, as well as our pro-democracy umbrella movement at the time. However, as soon as he arrived in Thailand, he was detained by the Thai government. According to the report, the Thai government had previously received a letter from the Chinese government regarding Joshua's arrival. This was the very first sign of China's interference in Thai domestic issues. Following then, China's intervention increased, as seen by the monarchist Thai association with the CCP throughout the Thai movement since 2020. As a strategic point for China, Thailand has granted many trade assets as rewards of being close to the totalitarian regime. Without a doubt, the governments of China and Thailand recognize the strength of the youth-led movement and the globalized civil society solidarity. This is why they have built up walls with censorship and travel bans. However, such a traditional method of control faced the challenge of digital advancement in the digital era, as Joshua demonstrated by making a video call from Hong Kong to the university and continuing to offer his thoughts. People can still make an impact with their ingenuity despite authoritarian control. For now, we still have no idea when Joshua can leave the prison. Up until now, Joshua has been detained for 9 months, and there's a verdict of a national security law charge pending. It could be many years if the CCP is determined to lock him up. It's devastating to see my comrades imprisoned, but that means we just have to work harder to fight for democracy. Before the British government handed over Hong Kong in 1997, China agreed to a point to allow the region considerable political autonomy under the one country, two system framework. But for many years after 1997, Beijing refused to honor its promise to implement a full democracy. As a result, Hong Kongers choose to fight for their future. The Umbrella Movement in 2014 was a watershed movement in Hong Kong's history, with Hong Kongers for the first time using civil disobedience to express their discontent. The 2019 anti-extradition bill movement was another turning point. Millions of Hong Kongers witnessed the downfall of two systems and the police brutality after Beijing introduced a bill that gave its power to bring anyone in Hong Kong who they accused of breaking the law to China's court for trials. That means the end of the firewall nature of Hong Kong's two systems, which Hong Kongers once relied on preserve our right to freedoms of expression and speech. Now, the situation in Hong Kong has deteriorated since the national security law was enacted. The law provided Beijing the authority to label all sorts of dissident activities as subversive, using vague words such as violating national security or interests. Hong Kong has moved from one country, two system to one country, one system. After then, Beijing continues its grip on every aspect of our civil society. Politicians were imprisoned. Human rights organizations, teachers' unions, pro-democracy media, and even organizers of the June 4th massacre commemorations were forced to disband. Civil officials were compelled to take an oath affirming Beijing's values, while elected lawmakers were unseated. Censorship applied to films and cultural works. Worse still, even Canton pop singers were forbidden from performing due to their political beliefs. In this context, Hong Kong's population is declining for the second year as a result of the escalating outflow. Tens of thousands of families have fled the city to protect their children from brainwashing education, when Beijing instills patriotism in classrooms, and when schools remove books like George Orwell's Animal Farm in order to comply with the new security regulation. When hope fades, however, it does not mean that our fight for democracy is over. As a Hong Konger proverb goes, there are hopes as long as there are people. No matter how gloomy the situation is, Hong Kongers live abroad, continue to speak up for those who remained in the city. Through exhibitions, media interviews, and remembrance ceremonies, people across the world make our voice for democracy heard. People inside the city also express discontent with more convoluted and subtle ways, operating in a very closed political reality. When the global democracy is now on the decline, democratic activists in all nations are not grappling with our own government, but also with the rising authoritarian force, the CCP. More and more often, the Chinese Communist Party's growing dominance in the region has become the new norm for all multi-allies. As the protests in Myanmar have shown, China is not only keeping strong ties with the repressive regimes in South Asia, it also offers financial and material support to other dictators when they are subduing unarmed protesters. Given its aggressiveness, China is spreading its authoritarianism to every corner in the region, backing and exporting its repressive patterns to all like-minded repressive regimes. With its Security Council veto, China seeks to block all United Nations measures aimed at punishing repressive governments. At the same time, China's Belt and Road initiatives serve as a form of economic coercion, benefited from offering large debts and massive investment. Neighboring nations become more reliant on China. As a result, China converts its economic might into political influence, turning other nations into its cheerleading status. All of it is to ensure China's regional supremacy. As a result, all democratic efforts in the region must take China into account. China is undeniably attempting to undermine the international human rights system and to challenge the global norm. China is the driving force behind this global assault on human rights. Without addressing the China factor, we won't be able to achieve democracy. In light of this, the multi-alliance is a critical step in confronting this political giant and achieving our cause. The alliance is a silver lining for the restoration of democracy in South Asian countries. It is a source of power from which activists in every country can be empowered and enlightened. Only through cross-border collaboration and solidarity, we can demonstrate the power of powerless and continue our fight against repressive authorities. By fighting side by side, we are able to share our experiences, raise public awarenesses, and speak up for one another when one cannot. In our battle against atrocities, we are not fighting it alone. In recent weeks, our brave Thai friends are still fighting tooth and nail to demand their Prime Minister's resignation over his broken promises and mishandling of the pandemic. I hope that the international community will continue to support our Thai youngsters in the quest for true democracy. Multi-alliance stands with Thailand. Hong Konger stands with Thailand. Thank you so much.